Wausau, Wisconsin, was a small town where trust was part of the fabric of life. Everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. It wasn't uncommon for parents to rely on friends, neighbors, or acquaintances to watch their children. For Sarah, the single mother of two, juggling work and parenting was a daily challenge. Babysitters like Marissa Tietsort made that balance possible, or so she believed. When Sarah handed over her 2-month-old son Benson and his older brother to Marissa that October afternoon, it felt like just another busy day. She'd used Marissa before. The babysitter's demeanor was warm, almost overly accommodating. She was the type of person who smiled a little too often, her cheerfulness teetering on unnatural. But Sarah didn't think twice. Marissa had always been on time, always eager to help. There was no reason to suspect the babysitter held dark secrets, or that the trust Sarah placed in her would lead to the most devastating night of her life. What Sarah didn't know was that Marissa had been hiding more than just a bad day or minor mistakes. She was living under the shadow of a child abuse investigation from earlier that year. A complaint had been lodged against her after an 11-month-old in her care was left with suspicious head injuries. She claimed the baby had fallen from the couch, but doctors determined the injuries didn't match her story. That October day, Marissa was out on bail and under orders to avoid children. But no one had informed Sarah. No one warned her about the danger she was walking into as she dropped off her boys, trusting Marissa's smiling facade. Hours passed. For Sarah, it was just another day at work. For Benson, it would be his last. In Marissa's care, 2-month-old Benson's fragile life came to a violent and heartbreaking end. Benson was a baby full of promise, with tiny fingers that curled instinctively around anything they touched, and a soft, inquisitive gaze that melted hearts. That October day, his older brother played nearby as Marissa went about her routine. To an outsider, it might have seemed like an ordinary afternoon, but behind closed doors, something horrifying transpired. Marissa's previous brushes with the law were warnings ignored. Her indifference to consequences had grown into something far darker. The babysitter, already under suspicion for abusing another infant just months earlier, was dangerously out of control. That afternoon, Benson suffered injuries no child should endure. The medical examiner later revealed the harrowing truth. Benson had died from blunt force trauma to the head. His tiny body showed signs of significant violence, including multiple impacts to his skull and a fractured tailbone. These injuries were not the result of an accident, but of deliberate, sustained force. When Benson became unresponsive, Marissa didn't panic or seek help. Instead, she shifted into a mode so cold and calculated it would haunt investigators and the victim's family for years. The aftermath. Marissa dressed Benson's lifeless body in a snowsuit, pulling the hood snugly over his head. She fastened him into his car seat, ensuring he looked like he was merely asleep. Then, as if the weight of what had happened didn't exist, she carried on with her day. When her boyfriend returned home, Marissa said nothing about the tragedy that had unfolded in her apartment. Instead, she suggested they all go out for dinner, her boyfriend, her child, Benson's older brother, and the lifeless infant still strapped into the car seat. The group went to McDonald's, where security footage would later show a horrifying scene. Marissa eating her meal as if nothing were amiss, the car seat containing Benson's body nearby. By the time Sarah returned to pick up her boys later that evening, Marissa's demeanor was eerily calm. "He's sleeping," she said casually, handing Benson back in his car seat. Sarah, in a rush, didn't notice anything unusual. It wasn't until later, when Sarah stopped at a laundromat, that the grim truth revealed itself. She reached out to adjust Benson's hat, and was met with a chill that sent her heart plummeting. His small body was cold and unresponsive. Panic consumed her as she tried to rouse her baby. Her screams echoed in the laundromat as she frantically attempted CPR, but it was too late. Benson was gone. As police were called to the laundromat where Sarah discovered Benson's lifeless body, the initial shock of the scene left even seasoned responders struggling to process what had transpired. The infant's small frame, still dressed in his snowsuit. Sarah's cries filled the laundromat as she cradled Benson, desperate for a miracle. Emergency responders arrived, but their attempts to revive the baby were futile. The timeline of events needed to be pieced together, and the answers would come from Marissa, who by then was no longer at the scene. Instead, she was miles away, attempting to hide from the consequences of her actions. The police traced Marissa to a local hotel. When they found her, she was swimming with her boyfriend and their child as if nothing had happened. The casualness of her behavior struck investigators as chilling. This lack of remorse, coupled with her attempt to carry on her day while concealing a death, painted a picture of a woman devoid of empathy. When questioned, Marissa initially denied any wrongdoing. She claimed Benson had died in his sleep and maintained that she had only discovered his unresponsiveness when it was too late. But the evidence told a different story. Medical examinations revealed the horrific injuries Benson had endured, injuries that could not be explained away as accidental. Marissa's story began to unravel under the weight of the facts, and her demeanor, detached and emotionless, only deepened the horror of the case. The authorities turned their attention to Marissa's history. What emerged was a pattern of neglect, abuse, and a troubling ability to mask her true nature. The investigation into her prior babysitting roles revealed alarming accounts from other families. An 11-month-old girl in her care had suffered significant head trauma just months earlier. Marissa's explanation had been dubious at best, claiming the baby had fallen. The injury, however, was consistent with forceful impact, leading to an ongoing child abuse investigation at the time of Benson's death. Her own children had also borne the brunt of her negligence. Social services had intervened multiple times, removing her children from her custody after repeated incidents of mistreatment, yet Marissa managed to slip through the cracks, continuing to find work as a babysitter and caregiver. Back at the station, Marissa's interrogation continued. Her initial calm began to fray as detectives confronted her with the inconsistencies in her story. Surveillance footage from McDonald's was among the most damning pieces of evidence. It showed Marissa eating alongside her boyfriend and her child, with Benson's lifeless body strapped into the car seat next to them. Her nonchalance in the footage was a stark contrast to the reality of the situation. Forensic evidence would later confirm the timeline of events. Benson had likely died hours before Sarah arrived to pick him up. The injuries he sustained were consistent with blunt force trauma and the lack of any attempt to seek medical help. The defense attempted to shift the narrative, arguing that Marissa had not intended to harm the infant and that her actions were a result of panic and poor judgment. They portrayed her as a troubled individual with a history of personal trauma, suggesting that her inability to care for children stemmed from deeper, unresolved issues. But the weight of the evidence and Marissa's own behavior proved insurmountable. However, Marissa Tietsort was sentenced to 37 years in prison for first-degree intentional homicide, with additional time for her previous child abuse offenses. Let me know, what do you think of this case and which you would like to see next? Till next time.